All right. Hey, good morning. We've got Western World Geography today with several Padlet canvases to review. So we'll be starting that in just a moment. All right, it is 9:30, so we can get started here. Yes. And we have a set of Padlet canvases to review. So I have queued them up and we'll be displaying them on my screen here one by one. When it is your Padlet canvas on the screen, I need you to casually comment about your three things that you are highlighting there. Ideally, not just reading the slides, but just casually telling us what is going on there, what you chose. And certainly you have to unmute to do that. If you'd like to turn your video on when you're talking, that would probably be good as well. Okay, so we have several Padlet canvas to look at, a map quiz tip or two as well. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. And again, when it's your turn for your Padlet canvas, to please go ahead and unmute and tell us casually about that canvas. All right, so I've got a Padlet canvas on the screen now. It looks like it belongs to Taylor.
Okay, you want me to talk now?
Yeah, all right, Taylor, I can hear you. Sounds good.
Yeah. Okay, so the first picture is the green one, and that's just showing that California has the largest economy in the US. And then the red picture is another picture of California, and that's kind of showing that California takes up 2/3 of the West Coast, and it has the highest point and the lowest point in the US. So I thought that was pretty cool. And yeah, there you go. You can kind of see it there.
Okay, keep going. And
then the third picture is just the population in California, and it's at 37 million people right now. So when you click on it, it compares California to Florida.
All righty, thank you. So there's three things about California, and certainly the size of California is striking, isn't it? Whether it's the area, one of the bigger states, but the population, the biggest state. Okay, and that certainly has implications for their economy and other things. All right, so that was Taylor starting us off with California. Now I have Kate. Katie will need to unmute. We'll come back to Kate, it looks like. Okay. Hey, Jalen.
Give me 1 second.
Yes.
So I picked the state of Michigan. The animal for the state of Michigan is the white antler deer. The first one is that Michigan is separated into two. State of Michigan is separated into two parts. And that's because in 1835, Ohio and Michigan were in a war for the area about who's going to get Toledo, the city of Toledo, I should say. And but because they didn't want a war, they gave Michigan the northern part, and then they gave Ohio the southern part, which contained Toledo. And then the next one is Michigan. We have 5 Great Lakes. Well, Michigan touches 4 of the 5 Great Lakes. Many states don't touch any lakes, or maybe have 1 or 2, but Michigan is the only state that touches 4 lakes. And then Michigan has the longest freshwater coastline. If you take out the freshwater, then it's the second longest, only behind Alaska. That's why fishing is it's really popular in Michigan.
All right, thank you. Lots of water factors there with Michigan, yes. And important to make that distinction, freshwater or seawater. Alaska, of course, has ocean coastline. All right, good. So we'll go on then to Thomas. Tom.
Yeah, so I chose the state of Texas, and I included a famous saying in the top left corner, everything is bigger than Texas. I also included the size of Texas, which Texas in terms of area and population is the second largest in the United States. I also included the natural resources in Texas, which Texas makes up around 20% of the United States oil, which I found interesting. And then I also included the weather in Texas, which everyone knows Texas is usually associated with warm weather. And it is the 4th warmest state in the United States and has an arid climate in the west and then a subtropical climate in the east of Texas.
All right, there's a quick look at Texas, and indeed, that's what they say. Everything is bigger in Texas. Sometimes it's true, like oil production. Sometimes it's just part of the Texas thing to be bigger in Texas. All right, and we'll go on to South Dakota.
South Dakota has more shorelines than it does Florida. South Dakota has more shorelines due to its mile-long rivers, crystal clear lakes, and the waterfalls. The longest river in South Dakota is the Missouri River. It's over 2,000 miles long.
There we go. Okay.
South Dakota is known for one of its largest caves. The Wind Cave National Park is one of the biggest complex like mazes. Because it's known for its natural wind that comes out of the entrance of the cave. And then South Dakota is home to Mount Rushmore. The national monument was chosen in the Black Hills due to its the composition of granite, and it faces the southeast, taking advantage of the sunrise every day.
All right, there's a look at South Dakota, and more interesting about water, right? Depends on how we measure things. Are we counting rivers? Are we counting lake shores? Are we counting ocean coastline to get different measures? So we pay close attention to what's being measured there. Having grown up in Minnesota, I've been to South Dakota many times. I worked in South Dakota for a while. So I have been to Mount Rushmore, and I've been in Wind Cave. And it is quite an interesting guided tour that you can get in Wind Cave there in western South Dakota. All right, that was South Dakota. Let's go on to Ohio.
Okay, so I decided to talk a bit about the culture. I forgot to do some stuff about geography. So what spoke to me about Ohio was its sports history. It's got a ton of sports to focus on. Got two teams in football and baseball, and then there's one in the National Basketball Association, and then one in the National Hockey League. And then as far as music goes, there were quite a few musicians born there, and I listed some, but those aren't all. And also the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is located in Cleveland, I believe it says there. And then as far as history goes, is the mother of presidents. 7 presidents were born there. That's the second most out of any state behind Virginia, which has 8. And then also one of the presidents was born in Virginia, had lived in Ohio when he was elected for president.
So if you're ever asked a trivia question, where were most presidents from, you better say either Virginia or Ohio to get the answer there. All right, so there's a look at Ohio, some of our popular cultural things, sports, rock music, notable in Ohio. Okay, far away to Alaska.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. So Alaska, its nickname is the last frontier because of its landscape and climate. First off, we're going to start with Alaska's coast, touching 3 different seas. Those specific seas are obviously the Arctic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, and Bering Sea, which you can see on the map right there. Shows those 3 seas that it sits on. Alaskan mountains, apparently, this is really cool. The 17th of North America's 20 tallest mountains. The Alaskan natives call the main mountain Denali, or the Great One and the Tall One. Either way, it's pretty cool, I think. This just sounds like a cool name. And then the volcanic activity. There's plenty of volcanoes, like 100. And 2 volcanoes are active currently, and you can see there that's an active mountain in the mountain field. It's really cool. It's really scary, actually.
All right, good. There's Alaska for us. All right, we've got a bit more, but here's a good point for me to remind you that, yes, we're not doing this just for something for you to create, but we're doing this to learn about the different states. That's one reason why we didn't double up. We didn't have people choose to do the same place. So I do create test questions out of these presentations, out of these canvases. And a very common way that I create a test question is multiple choice that would say something like this. What is not true about Alaska? Alaska's coastline touches 3 different seas. Alaska has many of North America's tallest mountains. Some of those mountains are volcanic. Alaska has the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Well, clearly, if that were a multiple choice question on the test, you would choose the last one. That is definitely not true about Alaska. It does not have the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. As we've seen, that was in Ohio. Okay, so yes, you're learning something about these places as we go along. Additionally, because you provide me with the web link, I do create a list of web links. And before the next test, I'll be sending you a list of those links so that you can also go take a second look at these Padlet canvases. All right, so we have a bit more. Katie, can you talk about Quebec here? Katie, unmute. Okay, we'll see if Katie comes back. All right, I also have one here on Massachusetts. Kathy.
So I chose Massachusetts. So Massachusetts is very foresty. Over 60% of Massachusetts, it's actually covered in trees. It's actually ranked the 8th most forested state. 42% already is being conserved. 21% of it faces high threat of development, and 37% is low threat of development. So they definitely try and preserve their forests. Massachusetts is also known to be the Bay State. The Bay State is the most familiar nickname of Massachusetts in reference to it being near the Cape Cod, and as well where early settlement took place. The Bay covers approximately 1,560 square kilometers, and other nicknames for Massachusetts is the Old Colony for early settlement in the 1620s. Massachusetts is also known for Salem and its witch trials, specifically because about 25 people were killed during the witch trials in Salem, almost witchcraft. And they say that more than 25 people actually died. Eventually, the colony admitted to making a mistake, and they went on to contemplate the family. It's also known for many famous movies, like my favorite, Hocus Pocus. And typically every year, there are about 500,000 people that visit Salem.
Indeed, there's certainly something about those Salem witch trials that captures people's attention and imagination. In recent years, there was a TV series called Timeless that involved a time travel ship. And in one of the episodes, they went back to the Salem witch trials. I enjoyed the series. All right, so Massachusetts, it's absolutely right that Massachusetts, a majority of the land is forested. Somehow that just seems surprising. Sometimes it's a small East Coast state. We know the East Coast tends to be more urban than the west side of the United States, at least till you get to California. But Massachusetts has a lot of forested area, besides some prominent cities, of course, Boston being the biggest one. Okay. Right. Do I have anyone else doing a Padlet Canvas today? Okay. This is the Quebec one, right? And the background of this one is quite striking. I think there's a huge hotel right there in Quebec City. I have taken a tour in the hotel, which was quite interesting. Staying in the hotel was quite expensive, so we didn't do that, but had the tour. Quebec City is quite an interesting place for tourism. Quebec province, of course, is notably French Canadian. So all the signs here are in French and in English. A beautiful location. And okay, we got the moose out here too. Yes, one of Canada's kind of symbols, the Canadian moose. Okay, we're going to jump ahead then to map quiz tips. I know I have one here from Houston, for Houston. So if this is your map quiz tip, jump up here.
Okay. So I had Houston and I said, we live in Illinois. How long would it take us to get to Houston, Texas? So if we're driving in a car, it would take us about 17 hours. Or if we went on an airplane, it would take us about 4 hours. I would want to pick the fastest because I'm impatient, so I would definitely fly to Houston. Can you go to the next one?
It is on my screen on the next one. Let's try this.
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay, so then if you're looking at the map in the Gulf of Mexico, there's like a little shape of a bird right by Houston. So I'm gonna remember if I'm flying in an airplane to go to Houston, I'm gonna look for the bird that's flying to Houston too.
All right, we're going to fly to Houston. So let's all remember Houston's location for the map quiz. All right. Okay, do I have any other map quiz tips then? All right, well then I'm going to go on to my bit of today, which includes a map quiz tip and my Padlet canvas, and then we'll see where we are on time and what we do next. All right, so here is my map quiz tip for the Great Lakes. All right, that's my favorite actress, Sophia Milos, who was best known for some years on CSI Miami. Maybe you've seen reruns of CSI Miami with her involved there. But I use her name and this phrase to remember the Great Lakes. So Sophia Milos has earned ovations. Well, sure, she's an actress, so she's earned ovations. So S for Sophia is S for superior. M for Milos is M for Michigan. Has is H for Huron. Earned is E for Erie, and O, ovations, and Ontario. So if you can remember the phrase, Sophia Milos has earned ovations, you ought to be able to remember the Great Lakes going from west to east. So I have a little phrase here for the Great Lakes, just as I had a phrase for Australia's cities when I did my map quiz tip there. Okay, and then I have my state that I've chosen is Minnesota. And I've chosen that because I grew up in Minnesota, spent most of my years there, growing up years anyway. And since I'm the professor, I get to expand a little bit more on the chosen state. So I'm going to give you a presentation here, 3 things to know about Minnesota. Well, before those 3 things, just a little background showing you on the map, indeed, where Minnesota is. So we've got North and South Dakota on the west, Iowa, just a sliver you can see there on the south, Wisconsin, of course, on the east, Lake Superior in the northeast, and then we've got Canada on the north. Notice one thing, there's quite a few blue spots on the map there in Minnesota. Then those are lakes, of course. A lot of lakes in Minnesota. Those are the bigger ones. Of course, there are even more than that, but they'd be too small, many of them, to put on a map of this size. All right, and a little background is that we have 5.5 million people there in Minnesota and of just about 87,000 square miles. Compare that to Illinois. Illinois is about 58,000 square miles. So Minnesota is about 50% bigger in area, but Illinois has about 12 million people. So Minnesota is not quite half as populated as Illinois. That does mean then that Illinois being smaller in area and larger in population, Illinois is obviously more crowded than more densely populated, certainly because largely of Chicago. All right, so 3 things everybody should know about Minnesota. Here are the 3 things I'm going to discuss. Number 1, physical landscape is wet. Number two, Northern European heritage. Many people in Minnesota have ancestry from Northern Europe. And number three, yeah, cold, certainly known for being cold. And I'm going to wonder if number two is related to numbers 1 and 3. We'll at least throw that out there. All right, so number one, the physical landscape is wet. Officially, it's known as the land of 10,000 lakes. Yes, that's on their license plate. Well, 10,000, of course, that's just a very nice round number. There's not exactly 10,000. In fact, probably 12,000 is a better measure. 10 acres in area, surface area, you get about, for the water, you get about 12,000 lakes that are of that size or bigger. You just saw a map with some blue on it showing the larger lakes of Minnesota. Obviously, water takes up some of the surface. Most of the surface clearly is land, but for the state as a whole, 8.5% of the surface area is water. And sometimes that is just visually observant. Well, here's a couple of the largest lakes in Minnesota. Red Lake, which you see at the bottom, is split into Upper Red Lake and Lower Red Lake. Combined, it's number 16 in the USA in how much surface area there. But if you look further north, you see Lake of the Woods. And Lake of the Woods is actually bigger than Red Lake. But you also see the border cutting through there. The Canadian border cuts through Lake of the Woods so that some of it is in Canada and some of it is in the United States. This does create an oddity, this sort of notch at the top of Minnesota sticking into Canada, and it creates a section of Minnesota that does not touch the rest of the land of Minnesota. This exclave of land, you can only get to it if you're staying within the United States, you have to take a boat across Lake of the Woods to get to this northwest angle, or you have to drive into Canada and then back into the United States by going into this little nook there in Minnesota. Okay, my family's had a lake cabin for a long time. Family bought into it around 1960 on the shore of Ottertail Lake. And I mentioned this because of wet, but also because looking at that map there, yeah, a lot of the surface looks to be of water. Now, in Minnesota, of course, there are counties. Every state in America has counties, although Louisiana calls them parishes. And typically counties are further divided into townships. So Ottertail Lake and some of what you see on the map there is in Amor Township. And a third of the surface of Amor Township is water. Yes, when you drive around it, you take a corner on a road and there's more water. Go a little farther, you look on the other side, there's more water. There's just lakes all around. But some places have even more. A friend of mine has a lake cabin in Pelican Township near Brainerd, Minnesota. And some years ago, his brother took the three of us up in a small airplane. His brother has a pilot's license to fly small planes. And we went up just for fun and to look around. And looking around, man, that day I said, there's just more water than land down there. But it turns out I was right. 58% of the surface in Pelican Township is water. All right, so water, very, very common in Minnesota, land of 10,000 lakes. And of course, this has an economic impact in that a lot of tourist activity can be with water. We like lake shores. Some people like fishing, others like water skiing. There's all sorts of things to do right with water. coastlines, lakes, and so forth. So it is a big deal for Minnesota. All right, number 2, Minnesotans, many of them cite ancestry from Northern Europe, Northern European heritage. And maybe that is connected to the lakes. These 3 Northern European countries have lots of lakes, many more than are in Minnesota. So people who grew up in Norway, Sweden, Finland are also very accustomed to water being nearby, to living on a lake shore, to having it easily accessible. So when a Norwegian or a Swede or a Finn migrated to the United States, perhaps Minnesota, because of the lakes, felt sort of like home, felt familiar anyway, and thus was a comfortable place to settle. I'm sure that did happen at least somewhat, people making that connection. So let's see, if we look at people in America and people in Minnesota, how many are saying their ancestors, or at least some of their ancestors, come from Norway? So we can look at it in 2 different ways. One is that in Minnesota, 17% of the people there say they have Norwegian heritage. So 1 out of every 6 Minnesotans has Norwegian heritage. The other way of looking at that is saying, okay, for the United States as a whole, where are the people who say they are of Norwegian heritage? Well, most states have very few people who say they're of Norwegian heritage. For the whole country, 19% of those people are in Minnesota. Or if you'd like to see it visually, here's a map by county showing people who cite their ancestors as being from Minnesota. So the darker the shading and the bluer the shading, the higher the percentage of people in that county said they have Norwegian ancestry. Well, notice indeed that most of the counties in the United States have very few. The most common light shading there is 3.1% or less. Many of those counties would have fewer than 1% people saying of Norwegian ancestry, but definitely it's North Dakota and Minnesota who are leading the way in people of Norwegian ancestry. And since Minnesota has quite a few more people, just people, than North Dakota, they do come out ahead of North Dakota in this numbers of Norwegian ancestry. Nevertheless, there are some counties in North Dakota that have a third to even more than half of the population saying they're of Norwegian ancestry. But it's not just Norwegians, it's other Northern Europeans too. Swedes, for instance, 10% of Minnesotans say they have Swedish ancestry, and Minnesota, for the whole country, Minnesota has more Swedish heritage than any other state. And it's very clear on this map that that's true. Minnesota, yeah, you can see it. All across Minnesota, you can find people of Swedish ancestry. Those are the biggest 2, but there are still others. Danish Americans, Icelandic Americans come out number 3. And we can see that here for Danish ancestry. Look, boy, there's something going on in Utah there with Danish ancestry. But Iowa, Minnesota, North Dakota, Nebraska, and a bit of Idaho there. Those seem to be the big states for Danish ancestry. So why all these Northern Europeans in Minnesota? Well, again, maybe the water. Maybe, point 3 coming up, the cold. Note a couple exceptions, though, that are curious. Minnesota also is high in Hmong population, number 2 in Hmong population. And these peoples are from Southeast Asia. nowhere near Minnesota, nowhere near Northern Europe, but also areas with lots of water present. So that might still be a factor there. And in Somalis from Somalia, from Africa, so again, not Northern Europe, the Twin Cities have more Somali migrants than any other US city. All right, and here's a similar picture for the Hmong population. Wisconsin and Minnesota doing quite well there. Northern European heritage, does that also connect to the so-called Minnesota nice? Minnesota has often had this phrase attached to it. And one recent study found that Minnesota was the friendliest of all our American states. The friendliness. There used to be a show called the Prairie Home Companion on the radio with Garrison Keillor as the host. And the tagline at the beginning of the show was always, "Welcome to Lake Wobegon, where all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above average." Okay. Yeah, Minnesotans like to believe that they are particularly nice. Sadly, that reputation did take a big hit with the George Floyd murder, okay, that did take place in the Twin Cities. Little bonus fact, it used to be that when I traveled out of the state, people would say, "Wait a minute, are you Garrison Keillor?" Happened quite a few times. No, I'm not. All right, Northern European heritage, and maybe too cold. Maybe when those migrants came to America from Northern Europe and they found Minnesota a lot of lakes, they felt comfortable. And winter, certainly a prominent thing in Norway, Sweden, Finland, matching up in Minnesota. Maybe that too made people feel at home. Certainly Minnesota is known for winters, snowy, icy, cold winters. Now, it doesn't have to necessarily be bad. Some of that is beautiful, I think, in the winter. But while I would like to say, yes, cold, I'd like to also say a wide variety. You know, in Chicago, we get cold and we get snow. Not much right now, but sure, we do. And yet we also have hot summers, don't we? Well, indeed, the same is true in Minnesota. More known for the cold, but these summers can be quite hot. I've shown you some of the extremes on this slide, the highest temperature ever, the lowest temperature ever. A one-day change in 1982 of 71 degrees. Man, that must have been a day. 71-degree change in 24 hours. Snowfall, temperature, yes. More, yeah, colder than in Chicago, but still we understand winter here in Chicago too. All right, so wet, cold, and northern. Which of course then matches my Padlet canvas showing land of 10,000 lakes, showing winter's cold, and showing Northern European heritage. All right, so let's see. Okay, so we do have a good amount of time. We've been working on North America, right? And we've done a bit of North America. We did talk about language in North America, especially place names, the study of toponymy. We also did a bit on mobility, movement of people in the United States, and I argued that we have the most mobile society. And last time, I just gave you the teaser line for the next topic, which is urban pattern. So it's time to do that. Okay, we'll go there. All right, 3 things that everybody should know about America. Number 3, most mobile society leads to distinctive urban patterns. So I've already contended we have the most mobile society. I think that and other factors give us a set of urban patterns that's distinctive. There may be other countries that have 1 or 2 or something of our set of urban patterns, but I think the group of urban patterns that we have is distinctive. So how about these other factors then, besides the most mobile society? Well, 3 things I look at when examining urban areas, urban patterns, cities, countries with cities. These 3 things. Large area. Large area means you have enough space to have a number of cities. Little tiny countries, how can you have many big cities? You don't have the space for that. Large population. Countries with a large population have enough people to fill in many cities. If you are a small country, you have 1 million people, how can you have several million-person cities? Impossible. You need a large population. And the long history of urbanization gives a country the time for many cities to develop. Okay, so let's think about those. Which countries in the world have a large area? Well, Russia is by far the biggest in land area, significantly because of Siberia. And then the next 4 are really pretty close together. They're in the ballpark of 3.5 million square miles. So we're in there. We're one of the top 5 in the world in land area. Large population, of course, we remember that China and India each have over 1 billion people, that we're 3rd there, Indonesia 4th, and Brazil, for a long time, was number 5. We think probably not anymore. Pakistan has probably passed Brazil there to number 5. Okay, and the long history of urbanization. Urbanization came with industrialization. So the Industrial Revolution prompted more urbanization, and the Industrial Revolution happened first in Europe. So Europe has the longest history of urbanization. Europeans, though, brought that to America, and so we in the United States have a long history of urbanization. And in the other direction from Europe, Russia, I put a little squiggle there. I'd say Russia not as long a history of urbanization as Europe, but still fairly long. Okay. So which country was on all of these 3 lists? All right, here's a good chance for you to put an answer in the chat, and that can count as your being here, your attendance for today. So right now in the chat, go ahead, put an answer. Which country was on all 3 of those lists? Large area, large population, long history of urbanization. Okay, so indeed the correct answer would be us, the USA. We're on all 3 of those lists. And again, that is helping me point to my topic for today, that we have a set of distinctive urban patterns. All right, so I want to look at form, size, density, and problem in looking at these urban patterns. The form is, what do American cities look like? Could we draw them up could we draw models that we think apply to many American cities? Number two is size. Is there a pattern with the population sizes of US cities? Number three, population density. Some cities are more crowded than others. Well, of course, that's true. Not all cities are exactly the same. But why? Can we identify why some cities would be more crowded than others? And yes, we surely have urban problems, but I'm going to talk about one that's particularly spatial and geographic. Okay, so let's start then with urban models, with the form of US cities. US cities have developed over a long time, so we're going to look at different urban models that indeed try to reflect the city changing over time. So let's start with this one, and it starts with Chicago, which is handy for us. In 1925, a sociologist named Burgess, working here in Chicago, living here in Chicago, wrote a book about urban models, and he designed one model that he thinks is distinctive for American cities. And because he lived here, because he taught at the University of Chicago, he used Chicago as his example. And a key thing to his model is land cost. How much does land cost? Well, of course, that varies by the location. Land cost is not the same everywhere. Land cost where you buy your house is different than land cost where you build a factory, different than land cost where you're farming. Sure. All right, so he said, is there a way we can look at land cost, a way we can model or chart that? And he said, well, of course, the downtown, which we often call the central business district, the downtown Chicago land is very expensive, very, very expensive. For one, that's partly why there are tall buildings downtown, because land cost is so high, it's efficient to build up, sometimes more than across the landscape. All right, but then as you move away from the downtown, Burgess says land cost tends to go down. And surely that's true. Not exactly linearly, not exactly a straight line of cost going down, but in general, costs progressively go down as we move away from the central business district. If you're 1 mile away, the costs have gone down a little bit for what the land's value is. If you're 10 miles away, the cost has gone down further. In general, the cost of land goes down as you move away from the city center. Well, Burgess says then that land use should also vary by how far you are from the city center, because land use varies by land cost. If you are using land that was extraordinarily expensive, you need to make money off of that land. There are a lot of office buildings downtown Chicago where they're making money. They need to make money to be there because the land cost, buying the land, renting a place there on the expensive land, it's, yeah, whatever way you look at it, it's very expensive downtown. So if you're using the land there somehow, you need to make money. As you move away from the downtown, the land cost goes down, so land use can change. You don't always have to make so much money. Less urgent anyway. It's okay, maybe you have a warehouse. You're making some money off of it, but it's not as crucial. Maybe you've got an apartment building. You're renting, you're certainly getting income that way. All right, and you move farther out. Well, eventually you need places for people to live. So eventually there's going to be middle-class homes. Yes, and regular sorts of stores, grocery stores, and those kind of places. And if you move farther, you're likely to get more and more residential as land cost tends to go down. Yes, you can buy land and just have houses on it where you're not making any money from the land, but you're using it for your homes. Then eventually we hit the outskirts and we get into farmland, agriculture. All right, well, Burgess says we can design then a way to look at this by zones that are concentrically linked or within each other like this. Thus, some people call it the concentric circle model instead. Okay, so we have these different zones based on land cost, which then creates different land use. And Burgess says it doesn't really matter which direction you go. It's not the direction, it's the distance that makes a fact, that is the factor there. So for instance, 1A is our central business district. Let's say we go south into the yellow zone there, the yellow zone number 3, or we go west the same exact distance. There we are in yellow zone 3 again. Or we go north the same exact distance. There we are in the yellow again. You see, because we have these circle patterns, you can go the same direction or the same distance in any direction, and you'd be in the same zone or circle. This is what Burgess argues Chicago looked like at that time that he was studying Chicago. Okay, so different zones based on land cost, different zones make different land use. I like it, but there's still one odd thing here. One name for this is the concentric zone model, but another name is the concentric circle model. And what's the problem here when you say circle? Right? Here, the circle doesn't go all the way around because, of course, we have Lake Michigan there. So I think it's a little bit odd that Burgess chose Chicago as his example, because ideally this concentric zone or concentric circle model would have full circles. We ought to be able to say you can go east the same distance and get the same pattern. Why didn't he choose a city that has no odd features, no huge lake, no big coastline, not even something like a mountain range to affect it? No, just regular. Columbus, Ohio, something else. Well, he didn't live in Columbus, Ohio, or somewhere else. He lived in Chicago. He worked in Chicago. So he knew Chicago very well and thus used Chicago. Okay, I sort of get it, but I still sort of wish he picked a different city. Okay, so time passes and the American city doesn't remain stagnant, doesn't remain unchanged. Certainly, change happens. The city evolves. So another model comes along from Homer Hoyt, and he calls this the sector model. And Hoyt says, sure, the city is largely circular. Sure, land cost and land use are definitely involved in what happens in the city. However, he says we should add some other sectors. At least we should account for transportation. So for instance, not every block in the city is next to an interstate highway. Of course, that would be bizarre. Some blocks have narrow streets, some blocks have wide streets, some blocks have a highway, and some are adjacent to the interstate highway. Yes, there's all sorts of roads and streets. But what of those places next to interstate highway? Hoyt argues that that is going to alter what is nearby. For instance, what if you are a factory owner and you have this little thing that we'll just call it a widget. Your factory makes widgets and you want to sell these widgets all across the country. So you somehow have to distribute them. And your choice for distributing these widgets is the 18-wheel truck. So at your factory, you box them up and you put them onto 18-wheel trucks, and then those trucks drive across the country. Well, would you like your factory to be in a residential neighborhood with narrow streets? I would think not, right? That would be hard to navigate with lots of 18-wheel trucks. It would be troublesome. Or would you like your factory to be right next to the interstate highway? So your trucks can just go right on and off they go. Yeah, certainly that would be advantageous and increases the likelihood then that factories and warehouses would be next to the interstate highway. Or what about railroads? What about railroads? Is every block in the city next to railroad tracks? Well, again, of course not. Some parts of the city are next to railroad tracks. Again, if you're this factory owner and your factory makes widgets, but in this case, you distribute them by railroad car. That's how they get all the way across the country. Would you like your factory to be 10 miles away from the nearest railroad tracks? Well, that's not going to be very efficient. That means you'd have to put your product in boxes and then on trucks and drive the trucks then to the railroad tracks, then offload the trucks onto the railroad cars, and then they could go. Well, that's not very efficient. It's going to increase your cost of production. Wouldn't it be much better if you had 100 yards of train tracks that go right into the main line of the railroad, and there they go. Your factory is just right there next to the railroad tracks. That would be efficient. So Hoyt says, yeah, what about railroad tracks? What about major highways? That's likely to affect what is there. So his model looks something like this. You can see it's still a lot of circular pattern to it, but now number 2 is this light and manufacturing warehouse kind of area, because it's going to be where the transportation specialty is, interstate highway or railroad tracks. We could also modify this a bit to show airports. Certainly, land use near airports is not random either. Okay, so number 2 here shows wholesale light manufacturing because of transportation, a highway or a railroad going through there. Hoyt says this also, though, affects residential areas. For one thing, the wealthy are not living near the factories. If you can afford to build $1 million house, you don't put it next to a factory. Maybe you put it in a scenic area. That would be more likely. So on this chart, it's number 5 there, and you see not next to number 2. But who does work in those factories or warehouses? Well, commonly it is people of less income, either low income or middle income. And so we would expect, at least early in the city's histories, that, yeah, people working in the factories would be near the factories. So we'd expect some trend there with residential areas. All right, so the sector model adds sectors to here. That's sectors that are not only based on land cost, but at least also based on transportation access. Okay, time passes and the American city continues to evolve. And here is the multiple nuclei model. the multiple nuclei model. And I can clearly see this as an extension or an evolution of the sector model. Harris and Ullman say, let's look not just at transportation and not just at land costs, but as the city evolves, some areas specialize. And we'll call an area of specialization a nucleus. And thus, when a city has at least several to many of these nuclei, that's what we now call it, nuclei, nuclei being plural for nucleus. So we have the multiple nuclei model. So one drawing of it is this. You can see there's still a compact shape anyway, some curves to it, and now sectors, nuclei. And because we're in a college class, I think one interesting example would be the residential university. College of DuPage does not have dorms, so we don't have residential areas. We don't have people living on the campus. But how about the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana? How about the big University of Illinois downstate? They, of course, have dorms. They have thousands of students living on campus, as well as quite a number of students living in apartments near the campus. Okay. What sort of businesses would be there right next to the University of Illinois? Fast food? Yes. Students are not usually wealthy. Students like the efficiency of time and cost with fast food. Clothing stores? Sure. Clothing stores that market University of Illinois logos? Sure. Solar equipment dealerships? No. I don't think there are going to be any solar equipment dealerships next to University of Illinois. Students do not buy solar panels to put on their houses. Students don't usually own a house. Okay. Sports bars or other bars? Yes. Students like to go to sports bars and other bars. Many students like that. There are going to be quite a few of those next to the campus. Well, I think you see the pattern I'm trying to identify here. The businesses next to University of Illinois are going to target the students. They have thousands of students right there. So what do students buy? That's the type of stores or businesses that are going to be next to the University of Illinois. Well, that's a sort of specialization then. That would be one nucleus in the multiple nuclei model, the urban university. There would be other nuclei that specialize in something else. Okay, time passes, other models are developed. I'm not giving you every urban model today, but I'm trying to show you change over time. Vance and then modified by Hartshorne came up with another urban model that I see as an evolution of the multiple nuclei model. In the multiple nuclei model, we had specialization, thus these nuclei. But Hartshorne explains that sometimes these nuclei expand their specialization. So they're not just doing one thing anymore, but they've become many central business districts. And Hartshorne uses Atlanta as his example, saying that Atlanta now has, of course, a central business district, but it has several, scattered across the urban landscape, several mini versions of that. I've been to Atlanta a few times, and there's one of these that I've crossed paths with several times. It's called Buckhead. It's to the northeast of the downtown, and it does really feel like a miniature central business district. It has some tall buildings, but not as tall as downtown. It has offices and shops, but not as many as downtown. It has a mall, but not as much shopping as downtown. Yeah, it has all the same sort of things that the downtown has, but on a smaller scale. Mini central business district. And, you know, if we look at Chicago, I think we could argue that there now are some mini central business districts in Chicago, in the Chicago metropolitan area. I think Oak Brook may be one of those. Oak Brook for years had McDonald's international headquarters there. Oak Brook has a mall. Oak Brook has some of these same things that the downtown has, but clearly not as big or as prominent as the downtown, but mini. Yeah, that's what this is, the mini central business district. I think Schaumburg may be a mini central business district on the urban landscape of the Chicago metropolitan area. Schaumburg has Motorola's national headquarters. Schaumburg has a big mall. Schaumburg has some taller buildings, but not nearly as tall as downtown. Yeah, the mini central business district. Maybe there are others, maybe Evanston, maybe Naperville, or maybe they're going to be mini central business districts. Hartshorn uses Atlanta, but yeah, I can see that Chicago may have some of these things. Now, I haven't shown you the name of the model here. I've got question marks. I argue that Hartshorn was hungry the day that he named the model. In the chat, put down what you think he named the model. Is it A, the chocolate chip cookie model, B, the cinnamon raisin bagel model, C, the pepperoni pizza model, or D, the grilled fajita model? He's saying that the urban model here looks like one of these. The urban area with several mini central business districts scattered around it. Putting your answer in the chat. Five seconds. All right, well, I could see maybe it would be the chocolate chip cookie model because the cookie is relatively round, and then the chocolate chips would be the miniature central business districts. I could see that the raisin bagel could be it. The circle, the empty spot in the bagel would be the central business district, and then the raisins would be the miniature central business districts. Or maybe he was even hungrier and he calls it the pepperoni pizza model because the pizza would have that roundish urban shape, but then the pepperonis would be the mini CBDs. Grilled fajita, I just put that in there because I like a grilled fajita, but I can't see how that would be a good name for this model. I think he was hungry because he named it the pepperoni pizza model. Yes, that is the official name for this, the pepperoni pizza model. The pepperonis are these shapes. Okay, so that's today's look at urban models, So I've tried to show you change over time, evolution of the city by looking at some of the urban models that geographers have created. Okay, there are some others, but these I think show a nice trend in how we've looked at the American city. Okay, and so this is one pattern that I look at in my set of distinctive urban patterns that I'm presenting to you and that I argue are distinctive when we look at the world. All right, so there's more to do there, but we don't have time. So I want to just look at, always good to check in with the syllabus. Yeah, let's find that.